right, welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you join us for today's webinar on accessing resilience. My name is Valerie Bagley. I'm the Chief Program Officer here at the Change Companies. And for a quick introduction, for those of you who may not know about who we are here at the Change Companies, we provide evidence-based solutions for behavior change in the fields of addiction treatment, behavioral health, justice services, healthcare, and education. And for the last 30 years, we've been supporting our clients in delivering the best behavior change programming to the people that we serve. So we also develop staff trainings to help our clients continue to build their skills. And what you're going to see today is a little bit of a sneak peek into one of those training offerings. Today, we're going to talk about accessing resilience, and Robert Kehoe is with us to share how to manage stress, reduce burnout, and address some really common challenges in the workplace for people in helping professions. And I'd like to say before we get started, we have been so overwhelmingly grateful for the engagement and participation prior to this webinar. During registration, you all submitted probably over 700 incredibly thoughtful questions. We won't obviously be able to get to all of those questions today, but they do inform our training development and future webinar efforts. So I'd like to invite you to continue to use the question box there in your control panel to pose any additional questions throughout this webinar as they come up for you, and we'll see what we can do with those down the road. This webinar is going to be 30 minutes in length, with roughly a 15-minute Q&A session at the end of the presentation for those who submitted questions throughout the webinar and would like to participate. That is optional, and if we go a little over, feel free as you have engagements throughout the day to hop off as needed. But without further ado, I would love to introduce you to our presenter today. Robert Kehoe. He is a trainer and consultant in the behavior change field for over 20 years. He's worked with justice-involved populations in addiction and mental health treatment, providing direct services, developing curricula for treatment programs, and training and evaluating staff who manage those programs. Robert has facilitated over 100 trainings focused on cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, health and wellness, interpersonal groups, therapeutic communities, and more. So without further ado, let's welcome Robert Kehoe.
Thank you, Valerie. I appreciate it. Welcome to everybody clicking on. It's glad to have everybody involved. I'm looking forward to presenting this. I'm going to present a bunch of information in a limited amount of time. And as Valerie said, there's a ton of questions submitted, so that's great news. And we'll try to group them together and get you some of those answers that you pre-submitted. Let me turn off my webcam here just for a second. I'll make this a little bit clearer for people, and let me do that. And then there, I guess we are good to go. So again, welcome everybody. And we're going to be talking about resilience today. So what is resilience? Who has it? Do I need it? How can I increase mine? Can I have too much? We'll answer all these questions and more as we go through this webinar. So again, welcome everybody. And let's start off with some basic definitions of resilience. And I know many of you know a little bit about resilience. I know actually I saw that some people on the call or on the webinar are actually help with workplace burnout and help their staff with resilience. So we have quite the spectrum of attendees. But, as always, we'll start with the basics, talking about definitions. Resilience, as we're talking about it today, is successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences, the ability to bounce back when life happens. That's what we mean when we talk about resilience. Hey, how can we get back to where we were, before whatever, life happens means? Languishing in the middle here, we're talking about the absence of good mental health. This is a negative thing. So this fights against our ability to be resilient. Signs of languishing include dissatisfaction, lack of engagement, apathy, checking out, avoidance, things like that. These are all signs of languishing as we talk about, relating to resilience. Certainly contributes to workplace fatigue if you feel languishing, that I'm just getting by today, today to tomorrow, that type of thing. This is what we're talking about with languishing and workplace fatigue. The third term I want to talk about is burnout. And when we're talking about burnout, this is a negative. When you actually get to burnout, you've probably gone too far. It's emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, reduced personal accomplishment. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well, that personal accomplishment. The work example is you don't have the patience to do your job correctly. That's how you know when you're burned out. And this is a negative. It's difficult to come back from burnout. We want to avoid that by strengthening our resilience skills. So I want to give you an example from my life. This is something that happened to me 30 years ago, and it kind of, hopefully it'll help you understand that. It has nothing to do with behavioral change or behavioral workplaces, but it's just a solid example, I feel, to help you kind of understand it. And then you can make that work with your life situation. When I was in undergrad, I started off needing a couple extra bucks, so I like to figure out how to do that. And I ended up as a softball umpire for adults. I was normally scheduled, 3 to 4 games, um, a couple nights a week. At first, I was very excited. I liked sports. I played baseball in high school. I like getting out there, being involved, doing something totally different than, college. I went to trainings, worked on my mechanics. I really enjoyed the being out there, working with individuals, dealing with players, and things were going pretty good. I enjoyed it. I felt like I was progressing. As a matter of fact, I made it to a state championship game, which was a pretty good thing for an umpire. Weather happens in Texas. I happen to be in Texas. Weather happens in Texas, but I was able to handle it. I was enjoying it. I certainly, there were some things that came up, but I was able to deal with it. I would say in that example, was resilient. But unfortunately, after a couple of years, something happened, and it can be kind of summed up as I just stopped progressing. Things became more routine. I knew every situation. Nothing was new. It was just kind of less fun, less exciting. I started to become complacent. I became more irritated with questions. Players would argue calls, and I would become more and more irritated with that. Weather would happen, I would become more irritated with that. I started to even dread the last game of the evening. Then I was languishing in this situation. Definitely some workplace fatigue, even though my workplace happened to be a softball diamond. As time went on and then nothing got better, eventually I got more aggravated, irritated. Play rejections increased. That was a pretty good sign right there. I started just dreading the first game. I started dreading driving to the ballpark. And eventually just started reducing my availability, and then I just stopped umpiring. I was burned out. So I hope that that example there kind of shows you the three things: the resilience, the languishing, workplace fatigue, and then the burnout that came along in a not behavioral health example. Hopefully that helps. But now let's talk about strengthening resilience. These are strategies for increasing resilience. For beginners and pros, as I said, we have quite the spectrum of people on this call, so I appreciate that. The first skill is to understand that life happens. I want to back up just for a second and tell you one thing, that when we're talking about resilience and day-to-day resilience, there really are 4 ways to use resilience. And let me just say, the first way to use resilience is when we're talking about past adversities. These are traumatic life events that occurred in our past, and we're going to use resilience to get through these. There's another way to use resilience, and that's with major life events. For example, say death of a loved one, or loss of a job, or birth of a child. These are all major life events that you're going to have resilience to get through these things. But the resilience we're really talking about today is this third use for resilience, which is day to day, and what happens in your day to day work day or your day to day lives at work and also outside of work. If you're traveled to work and you're on, Highway 35 here in Dallas, you're going to deal with traffic. That's just one of those things. Have you ever had a client not show up for an appointment? Have you ever had one group member not show up for a group? All sorts of, new requirements that come down from on high about paperwork or, availability and things like that. So this is how we're talking about resilience today in this day-to-day way to take a look at how we can bolster our resilience, excuse me. So the first thing is to understand that life does happen. Things get in the way of what's happening. Is this a bad thing? is traffic a bad thing? I don't know anybody who likes to be stuck in traffic, but it's going to happen if you happen to be, commuting on a major highway. By the way, if your commute is from the bedroom to your office, because you're working remotely, you probably don't have to deal with traffic like somebody else does. But there's other things that you might have to deal with, interrupted sessions, or other things that happen when you're working remotely. So, it's kind of how we look at things, how we take our, what's our perspective on things. If it never was for an occasional bad or difficult client, let's say, we would never, understand the joy of having somebody really making substantial changes. So we look at it that way. And what is objective reality? What really are we looking at? As Valerie mentioned, CBT is certainly my background. So taking a look to see, what are we telling ourselves? What absolutes do we get caught in? What generalizations happen to us? What is objective reality? By looking at that will help us bolster our resilience. The challenge is people get stuck in the negativity. You're figuring out that, my boss hates me, or I never get an award. Group is such a beating. This job is the worst. So people have a tendency to focus on the negative instead of celebrating the positive. So a tip here is to look at it objectively. It's that second from the previous slide, was to look at objective reality, and it's what would a camera see? How would a camera record your boss hating you? Maybe a camera would show your boss asking you to do something you don't like. Is there one time you did get an award or recognition, when you thought you'd never get one? What is taking a beating? And this is something I've said, boy, that group was a beating. This is certainly I've said at walking out of a group, when I started off, as a junior counselor. What really would an objective observation of that beating look like? Is your job really the worst? What would the camera, how would the camera show your job is the worst? I'm assuming everybody can think of an example of a job that would be worse than this. However, if you're truly stuck in that, where you think your job is the worst, you really need to pull back and take a good look at what's going on in your life to see if this is the correct fit for you. The second tip for bolstering your resilience is to look at what you can control. The bad news, or potential bad news, is very little of what happens to you on a day-to-day basis is something in your control. The good news is that what is in your control is the most important thing for you to control. So that's a good way to look at that. Focus on what's in your sphere of control. So really hone in on that, and then let go of what's not in your sphere of control. By the way, if you've never done a sphere of control exercise, or you're not really sure, let's take a little deeper dive into the sphere of control to figure out, what we're really talking about. That inside light blue circle there, this is what things you're responsible for. In this case, my responsibility is I'm responsible for my words, my behaviors, my actions, my efforts, my mistakes, ideas, and the consequences of my actions. That's it. That's really, I'm sure you could find one other thing out there that you're responsible for that I didn't squeeze into that. But in general, that you're responsible for really how you react to things that go on, what you tell yourself, what your behavior is when something happens. What's not your responsibility is everything else, other people's words, other people's mistakes, other people's beliefs, ideas, or actions. As you notice there's a big blank spot there at the bottom of that. There's all these other things that are outside of your control: nature, weather, pandemics, random acts of animals, vegetables, and minerals. These are all things that are not inside your sphere of control. So it's important to really, when you're really trying to fight against languishing and fighting against burnout, to try to figure out what is in your control. And the challenge is, of course, that people don't understand what is in their sphere of control. People want to avoid responsibility for what is in their sphere of control, and then take responsibility for what's not in their sphere of control. So really just clearly understanding what is true that you control is going to help you deal with things that come up in your day-to-day work lives and home lives. The tip here is to be careful of the illusion of control. Okay, so what do we mean by the illusion of control? And then the illusion of control is thinking you have more control over things that you actually don't. Some of the basic examples here, of course, are just superstitions. I don't know how many of you, as a 5 or 6-year-old, avoided cracks so your mother wouldn't require back surgery. Things like that. If you happen to play cards, if you go to Vegas and you're playing blackjack and they switch the dealer, an automatic thought I always have is, uh-oh, now we're in trouble. Because I just assume that when something like that happens, I'm going to start losing. Or some people are just lucky. You get this that, a lot of people think, oh, that person's always lucky, or I'm never lucky. And, I think if a camera followed you around and took a look at objective reality, you would see that luck kind of plays itself out on an even plane if you actually even believe in luck. Okay. But also the illusion of control talks about if I do X, I will get Y. All right, let's take a look at some of these examples here. If I do my application perfectly, I will get the job. If I'm nice to my boss will be nice to me, excuse me. And if I run a perfect group, who knows what perfect is, all participants will show progress, okay? So if you took the application example there, what's in your sphere of control when you put in an application and get a job? Well, neatness, punctuation, grammar. Did you follow the requirements of the application? Did you get it in a timely manner? But that doesn't mean you'll get the job. Always being perfectly prepared doesn't mean you actually have control over who the selecting official is. And by the way, if you've ever been in a situation where you've gotten a job and somebody else didn't, and then that person gets upset at you, well, certainly I'm not the selecting official. I'm the one who got the job, but the people who don't get the job like to put it on, this person that, actually got the job, rather than taking an objective look at why they did not get the job. If you run a perfect group, all participants will show progress. Well, what is a perfect group anyway? I mean, we could spend an entire webinar talking about what a perfect group is, and that's an unrealistic expectation. But if you run a great group and you're prepared and, you have all your materials and you have good, group dynamics and all these other things we do as, treatment specialists or counselors, whatever term you happen to use, there'll be participants who will not make progress for whatever reason. The thing is you cannot control whether or not they make progress. So, you think about that when we're talking about how to be resilient when you're finding no progress in your group. If you're getting upset with individuals who are not making changes, well, maybe the better thing to do is to take a look at yourself and figure out what I can do to help make the groups better. So the third thing to bolster your resilience is taking an objective look at what you can handle. So put it on a scale of 1 to 100 and see what you can do to, quantify what's happened in your day-to-day life. By the way, this is a day-to-day life we're talking about, but when I would do this with clients, have them put everything down, regardless, major life events, things like that to quantify this. Start off with a blank piece of paper, maybe 3 columns, or if you do it across the bottom of the paper, maybe they need two rulers to kind of gauge along. And you just start with, tip one, like number one, if we were saying things that happen in your day-to-day on a physical basis, let's say you maybe have the slightest wisp of a stuffy nose. So maybe that's down at 1. And then 100 is the worst physical thing you can think of right before death. And then just start having them quantify things that might happen to them. For example, a sprained ankle is better than a broken ankle. 1 broken ankle is better than 2 broken ankles, or is, one of the keys to putting these things down and quantifying them is it's their scale. So maybe they feel that 2 sprained ankles is worse than 1 broken ankle, or whatever the example happens to be, okay? And you want to find many examples. So it's not only physical things, but also maybe emotional things. Someone you don't know at work doesn't say hi to you. Where does that range on a scale of 1 to 100? 100 on that scale, and these scales can be combined into one scale. Could be all the way up to, what's the worst emotional thing that can happen? By the way, very dramatic type exercise. So it can bring up a lot of things. You want to be cognizant of that if you're working with others, or even if you're doing it yourself. But when we really start to quantify where things are, and then it helps us to figure out what we can handle. After that exercise is done and they figure things out, and something happens, then you just have them repeat. I would prefer this didn't happen, and I can handle it. Of course, if you're doing this yourself or figure out how to bolster your resilience, I would prefer this didn't happen, and I can handle it. So some people like to put the but in there. I would prefer that I didn't have a car accident on the way to work, but I can handle it. The problem with the but is it kind of negates the beginning, and I don't know anybody who would like to have an accident on the way to work. So I would prefer I didn't have an accident on the way to work, but I can handle it. Okay. So whatever, I would prefer that my colleague didn't take a job somewhere else, and now the team has to deal with his caseload. But we can handle it. When you start quantifying things like that, you realize that the paper cuts, that's the worst. This is the worst. You really understand that it's really a 2 or 3 on that scale of what can happen in your day-to-day life. So, that's one thing to train yourself to really take a look at what you can handle. The challenge is sometimes having an unrealistic view of what you can handle or what's good for you to handle. Again, using the most extreme example of this I could think of is if you've ever worked with individuals who have suffering from domestic violence. And sometimes the individuals will say, hey, I'm very resilient because I stayed with them for the kids, even though blank, blank, and, this and that happened, fill in all this. And, so it's good, of course, what you're going to work through them is it's good you have resilience to get through your day to day, but what's a better way for you to, live your life? So having an unrealistic view of what you can handle is important to have. The tip here is to be careful of toxic positivity. This toxic positivity where you always, everything's always great, living the dream, or, everybody who asks you how things are going, everything is going great. No matter how big things get, no matter how bad things get, people should stay positive. Okay. And that's not right. In fact, that'll increase your ability to stay resilient because you're just not acknowledging things that go on. Okay. So what can we do to make this better is look for signs of languishing in your staff and colleagues. Okay. If those of you who are in the behavioral health field and you're working with, all sorts of presenting problems that individuals come in with, check in on your staff and check in on your colleagues. How are they doing? Hopefully they're checking in on you so you can get a realistic view of what's good for you to handle and should you actually be handling everything that's coming. The fourth strategy is evaluate your needs and wants. So when we're talking about needs here, we're talking about needs to employment. So, you have to work 40 hours a week or whatever your schedule, if you're Sunday through Thursday, noon to 8, that's what we're talking about versus goals or aspirations, things you want to get accomplished or what the organization wants to get accomplished. When we talk about resilience, we talk about increasing our ability, our resilience. But another side of the equation is also we could decrease what we need to be resilient to. So, the first principle to reducing burnout is to reduce demands. Adam Grant, IO psychologist, had that quote there. So one way to increase our resilience is to reduce what we need to be resilient to. So what demands does your job put on you? What's in your sphere of control at your job? For all of you who just said nothing, I want to caution you to take a look at things, because if you feel like you have nothing in your sphere of control, that's definitely a problem. Now, you might not be able to rework your schedule, or you might not be able to, change the organizational structure, but now what can you? Can you talk to somebody about doing this, or how can you, what's a good strategy to meet this goal, okay? And so there are things within your sphere of control at your job. And of course, the other thing is what demands are you putting on yourself? Now, related to the job, if your colleague is out and you got to cover a caseload, well, are you the first person to raise your hand or say, oh, I'll take the whole caseload versus, depending on the team and who else can meet some of those goals? So what are you doing related to your job demands that you're putting on yourself? Now, another way to look at this also is unrelated to your job. So, we talk about the 8 areas of wellness. What areas of wellness are you putting too many demands on yourself? What social demands, what physical demands, what financial demands are you putting on yourself that's affecting your ability to stay resilient? So, I think if there was just one thing you could do to bolster your resilience, absolutely just one thing to do, it'd be to increase your physical wellness. Now, I'm not talking about getting to the gym and, those things are good too, but I think the one thing that most people struggle with is, getting a decent night's sleep. 7 to 8 hours for adults. What's your sleep hygiene look like? Now, if you have a 4-year-old and he comes in because he's had a nightmare and wakes you up at 3 in the morning, that's definitely going to interrupt your ability to get sleep. You have no control over your 4-year-old's nightmare. Now, if you stayed up till 2 a.m., doom scrolling on social media, that's something that you can control. So taking care of yourself physically is probably the most important tip that you could just put out there generically to increase your resilience. The challenges at work, supervisors make assumptions about what individuals need and want, and vice versa. I had a supervisor who, talked about, was able to give her staff, either a time off award, a small time off award, or a monetary award. She assumed everybody wanted the money, and then later on, people found out that they could have had time off. And some people were like, "Oh, I wish I had had the time off. That would have worked better in my life than getting the small monetary award." So that certainly is an issue. Again, for staff as well, supervisees who want to help out, and sometimes will make assumptions about supervisors, what supervisors want, and go completely down the wrong path without checking in and seeing what actually is needed and what is actually wanted, and then also, strategizing the best ways to do that. So regular check-ins, I'm assuming your organization has regular check-ins. Certainly if you're doing clinical work, you have clinical supervision, but also, who is checking in with the supervisors? You want to make sure that's there as well. By the way, regular check-ins can be formal and informal. Formal are certainly important, but for some people, it's better to do informal check-ins. Hey, what's going on? You're going to get more, over making that first cup of coffee in the morning about how this individual is doing, whether they're languishing or having success, or you can talk to somebody about how you're feeling, in a more informal way than getting to a formal way. So think of that. And then lastly, we're going to talk about, remember at the beginning, I talked about 4 ways to use resilience, and I gave you 3, and here's the 4th way to use resilience, and it's going to help counter languishing and workplace fatigue if you do it right in most cases, is to use your resilience to try to do something different. Okay, now this something different can be related to your work. And for all of you who just said, oh my gosh, I'm languishing under my caseload, or I've got so much work, I can't do anything else. Well, take an objective look at that and say, hey, is that true? Is it really, I'm not saying take on somebody else's caseload. Is there a way to shuffle something around in your schedule that might work for you? Maybe you can do, a collateral duty, or let's say, for example, excuse me, for example, you always have the individuals who present with trauma, and maybe that's kind of grating on you, and you're having problems being resilient to that. Well, maybe you could switch over to clients who have substance use disorders, or maybe you could just focus on anxiety disorders, or wherever you happen to be in that situation. So think outside the box, but hey, say I'd like to try something different. One thing for sure, if you're doing groups, I always recommend to individuals to co-facilitate with somebody. This doesn't have to be co-facilitating every group. Maybe it's once a week, once a month, once a quarter. Get in there and co-facilitate with somebody. If you always co-facilitate with the same person, well, how about switching it around and co-facilitating with somebody, different? You'd be surprised how you can start to take another look at things. You can talk to other people about it, and how you can start seeing some success because you're not stuck in the same languishing rut. But of course, you can also try something different unrelated to your work, and that's important as well. We'll talk about this here right now, and not feeling a sense of progress overall in a person's life, and therefore not having success. So we talk about work-life balance, where you have work and then you have life, and then a lot of times that term becomes work-life blend, where certainly if you're working from home, or you're the type to be answering emails late at night and things like that, or you put a little laundry in while you're finishing up some progress notes, or however that works for you. But people, whichever way you're going, they're not feeling a sense of progress. They're not getting that satisfaction of doing a job well. It becomes routine. So one thing to do is, go back to the basics. Identify your values. What's important to you? Is family important to you? Is your career, maybe your career is important to you, being a better friend or colleague. Maybe it's actually, making more money. Whatever is important to you, go back and identify your values, and then find a new way to challenge yourself consistent with those values. How do you increase meaningful family time? Well, maybe you don't send emails, at 8 o'clock at night because you're playing with your kids, or you have a set, thing that you're going to do. You're going to, every Sunday afternoon now, you're going to do this family thing, or however that is. How do you reinvigorate your career goals? Maybe you find a mentor out there. Maybe you actually become a mentor out there and help people, in your field. That's certainly important. How to be a better friend, how to reach out more, how to be a better colleague, how to help more. And you start feeling that sense of success. And as we wrap up here, I want to kind of bring you back to my softball umpiring story, because I burned out. I wasn't doing these things. And then I actually said, you know what? I enjoy being out there involved in sports. So what I did is I switched up and became a basketball referee. And I still out involved in doing things, but I've kind of taken a new look at that. And I've been doing it for 25 years now. I know how to keep myself more resilient and better able to handle things that come up. And I enjoy doing that. So that's what I mean by use the resilience you already have, because everybody has resilience to some form, to try something new. You can strengthen your resilience. Resilience is something you can practice, and something your organization can help you practice. However, you're in control of practicing. So what of the strategies that you've heard today in this brief webinar would you like to take forward and put into your life, and figure out where you can bolster your resilience? So I think right now I'm going to turn this back over to Valerie. I'm going to see if I can remember how to turn my camera back on, because I think she is going to talk to you about some of the questions that have already come in. Valerie, I can't hear you. I don't
Yes,
know if you
sorry
can hear
about
me.
that. Thank you so much, Robert. Those were some really helpful messages. And throughout this webinar, some really thoughtful questions have come in addition to those 700 that I mentioned earlier. We are overwhelmingly grateful for those questions. We, again, will not be able to get to all of them today, but we're hoping to, craft blog posts and more webinars, and certainly fold these into our future trainings, because this is a really important topic. Clearly, we've only scratched the surface in this 30-minute time slot, and we're looking forward to digging deeper on this with you all. So the first question, Robert, let's just get right into it, is about creating resilient organizations. Can these skills be trained? Are there long-term strategies that maybe leaders should be taking into account as they're thinking about promoting staff well-being?
Well, yeah, certainly a great question. And these strategies absolutely can be trained and practiced, and institutions can put things into place, that are going to help people practice. Certainly, checking in. I'm a big proponent of, warm brownies, at check-ins, formal, informal check-ins, and meeting the person where they need to be. One thing that happens is, and I don't know any organization out there who's overstaffed. If you're overstaffed, then that's great. But I don't know any organization out there in this day and time that's overstaffed. Most are understaffed. Unfortunately, what happens is when they're understaffed, people have to cover caseloads and things like that, and we need to get things done. And one of the things that slips away is those check-ins, those meetings. How you doing? What's going on? And sometimes you even have the staff member says, I got this, don't worry about it, da, 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 and then they get off on their own. But the problem is if staff are left on their own and they're starting to languish, or heaven forbid, starting to, get burned out, the therapeutic relationship or the working alliance or whatever term you want to use begins to suffer. And of course, that'll reduce, positive outcomes. So that's what I would suggest there. And then if there was one thing that I think, to flip the script and make it a more positive is, how does your organization celebrate success stories? That's the thing. A lot of times we get stuck in the negativity loop because we see people who come back because they failed our program or need more treatment. And we forget about those people who actually, successfully get through, and, they're out there living their lives, making meaningful change. So how does your organization, do they, get the participants to send back letters or bring in a speaker once in a while? Because if all you see is the negative, it's hard to feel you're having success out there. That's what I think on that.
Great, thank you. And by the way, a lot of these questions are sort of an amalgamation of many of the questions that have come through. So I'm doing my best to encapsulate some of the themes that have come through, either through registration or in today's webinar. So let me attempt the same for this second question here, which is related to recognizing some of the early warning signs of burnout. What are some tips for addressing those really early on? And then maybe to piggyback on that a little, a lot of folks are asking about strategies for improving their own work-life balance to mitigate the risk of burnout. So maybe you can talk a little bit about those things.
Okay, so the first part, signs and symptoms of languishing and burnout is irritability, inability to sleep, anxiety, not being able to have work-life balance. If you're trying to have a work-life balance and you're bringing your work home figuratively, in your mind, if you're carrying all your things home and it takes you 3 hours to de-stress, and then in the morning you're just dreading going to work, avoidance is certainly a key. Nobody likes to be stuck in traffic. If you're secretly hoping to be stuck in traffic because that first group of the day is a beating, then you're definitely showing some signs and symptoms of languishing, if not burnout. Unfortunately, it's that frog in the pot thing that we don't notice it. When you put a frog in the pot on the stove and you turn the, if the pot was boiling water, the frog would jump out immediately. But because these things just keep building up and building up, then we get stuck. So that's certainly the problem. But starting to notice those things is an important skill. And the way you notice it is by talking to colleagues or supervisors or whomever. It definitely helps to talk to people outside the work life, but if you're dealing with stress and trauma and a lot of things that go on in behavioral change programs, then you're going to want to be, talking with people who are going through what you are going through. So it's two different types of support systems. One of the things an example I'd like to use is if you're on a secure mental health unit with severely people having dementia, how irritated are you going to get with that one individual who asks you the same question 10 times? You're on a severely, mentally challenged unit. So are you really going to get that upset when they keep asking you and they keep asking you? You don't get upset because you expect it. That's what happens, right? And sometimes we let ourselves get upset about things that go on in our programs that, people who've been trying to make these changes have been suffering with for 10, 20, 30 years. But we let ourselves get upset about it. We let ourselves get frustrated with them because they're not making the change we want them to make. And then we have to take a look at what's inside of our control. Why am I letting myself get irritated at somebody who is struggling? So that's the thing. For strategies with work-life balance, I would say that the number one thing is set boundaries. If you want that work-life balance, then setting boundaries. By the way, it goes back to taking. For some people, it goes back to, do you know what your job needs of you, and do you know what your job wants of you? Talking to colleagues and supervisors about realistic expectations about what to do in the workday. Do you need to return an email at 8 o'clock? By the way, if you're a supervisor, do you need to send that email at 8 o'clock? How do we set that up? If you're the work-life blend and you don't care and it's 40 hours, and however you get to 40 hours in, maybe you get 2 of those hours in at 2 in the morning. If that's the way it's set up for you and it's working for you, then you don't have any problems. But for those of us who feel like, oh my God, if I don't get this back on time, or if I don't show my boss that I'm working at 8 o'clock at night, then, I'm not doing my job correctly. So having a good discussion about what's truly expected and, slowing down, is that note at 8 o'clock at night really that important?
Right. That sort of segues into another question related to work life. A lot of the folks on this webinar are either in hybrid or fully remote working arrangements. And so how do we support staff resilience in a remote or hybrid working environment?
Yeah, if you're working remotely, certainly if you're working, if you're doing any sort of your meetings or on video or Zoom or whatever you want to call it, doing things virtually takes more time and effort to understand the conveyance of emotions and just to communicate things. It's not the way we're set up. Certainly in the last 3 years, we've certainly gotten better at this. But if you're working totally remotely or you're doing most of your work virtually, you really need to lean in and make strong connections. Again, talking with people who know exactly what you're going through. It's also important to talk with people who don't know what you're going through. But you really want to, set something up. If your only contact with people in a 40-hour work week is you and the screen, then you've got to set up, how do I get in the same room with people who are important to me in my life? For example, like, sometimes doing a training, even a training like this, we could have a 4-hour in-person training because people have to travel, or we could do it one day, 8 hours over, virtual. Well, if everybody works remotely, you're actually going to get more out of the 4-hour in-person training to support your staff and to, how can we make things work better, because you're all going to be in the same room and you're going to get that human connection and you're going to be able to talk to people and not have to wait to say, whoops, did Robert finish? Okay, now Valerie can come in and talk. And, that little pause that's just not in our normal conversation life. So if you're working remotely, definitely lean into making more connections, however you do that in your life.
Perfect. We're going to carve out time for one more question before we wrap up today. This is coming from a lot of compassionate leaders and supervisors who are in attendance today, who are either dealing with burnout themselves or are curious about how they can help their own staff who are dealing with burnout. What tips do you have for either of those?
Well, supervisors are people too. I just want people to know that. And of course, when I was junior, I was thinking, oh my gosh, my supervisor's got all this going on and I don't want to bother him with this, or I don't want to bother her with that, or, vice versa, So I think, showing that you're human, showing that this is, if you're a supervisor and you've been in your supervisee's seat before and done that job in such a way, how does that, how did you deal with it? How did you handle it? If you're suffering and you're languishing yourself, it's okay. I feel it's okay to tell people you're suffering and you're languishing, and work with them to create connections. we're all in this together. How can I move forward? If that's the thought. But showing that people that, if I want to be a supervisor and I never see my supervisor struggling, I am being modeled. It's being modeled to me that supervisors don't struggle. And of course, we know that supervisors struggle because they're human beings. We all struggle. I guess a concrete thing might be, helping, first thing of all is saying thank you as a supervisor. Thank you for the work you do. That's what I tried to do. And then figure out what that individual needs to find success in their life, whatever that happens to be. Okay, so how can I support you to make whatever you need to have happen? Okay. By the way, lastly, I'll just say that happens vice versa too. You as a supervisee can show support for your supervisor by, checking in. Hey, thanks for doing what you do, and what can I do to make this better, or how can I help you with your languishing? Because I know if I'm languishing and you're languishing, maybe the end result work is not where we want it to be. So it'd be great if we could strategize that. So maybe that was a long-winded way to do that last question, but that's what I would do as a supervisor.
Perfect. Let's go ahead and wrap up. That's all the time that we have for questions. And again, I just want to repeat that we're really looking forward to folding a lot of these questions and ideas into future webinars, certainly into our staff resilience training, which I'm going to touch on here in a second, and perhaps future literature that we put out here from the Change Company. So thank you so much again for submitting such thoughtful, authentic, just really helpful questions for us to start thinking about here internally. As a reminder, we will be sending a link to this webinar recording for everyone who's here today for you to view at a later time. We do have a handout for you to download that you can use as a reference sheet for the resources, skills, and strategies that Robert covered in today's webinar. And we will be sending a certificate in a couple of days to everyone who attended as well. You may notice in the chat box, we have dropped a link to our media library here as a token of our gratitude for all of you who came and joined us this morning. This is a wellness collection from our Director of Wellness, Mr. Johnny Barry Ochoa. Contains a lot of strategies that sort of reinforce what was shared today for managing stress in the moment, in those tough moments throughout the workday. Robert is one of our team of masterful trainers. Trainings from the Change Companies include a range of topics like effective facilitation, motivational interviewing, effective ASAM implementation, and yes, staff resilience and well-being. So do give us a call, 888-889-8866 to learn more about any one of those that you may have a need for in your organization, or feel free to visit our website at changecompanies.net. Thank you all again so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.